When a poor boy freed a chained dog from a luxury mansion, everyone called him a thief. But when the millionaire owner showed up at his doorstep the next day, even the gossiping neighbors fell silent. Andre sat alone at the far end of the school cafeteria, breaking his sandwich into tiny pieces. His worn uniform hung loose on his thin frame. The blue fabric faded from too many washes. Half of his lunch ended up scattered on the ground beneath his table, where 3 pigeons pecked eagerly at the breadcrumbs. "You're gonna go hungry again," he whispered to himself, but kept breaking off pieces anyway. The birds needed it more than him, he figured. His stomach growled in protest. The cafeteria buzzed with the usual lunchtime chaos. Kids shouting, trays clattering, chairs scraping across the floor. Andre barely noticed anymore. He'd gotten used to eating alone since most of the other kids avoided the poor table, as they called it. A memory hit him like a punch to the gut. His father standing in the doorway 3 years ago, suitcase in hand. "Sometimes people gotta look out for themselves, son." The words still echoed in his head, clear as the day they were spoken. Andre's hand trembled slightly as he tore off another piece of bread. The bell rang, jolting him back to reality. He gathered his things quickly, brushing crumbs from his pants. The pigeons scattered as he stood. "See you tomorrow," he murmured to them, shouldering his second-hand backpack. The walk home took him through the wealthy part of the neighborhood. Andre kept his eyes down, shuffling past manicured lawns and luxury cars. He learned it was better not to look too long at the nice houses. It just made the peeling paint and creaky steps of his own home harder to face. His footsteps slowed as he approached the Thompson mansion. It was the biggest house on the block, with perfectly trimmed hedges and a sleek black gate. Something was different today, though. A sound caught his attention, a low whine, followed by the rattle of metal. Andre stopped, looking toward the source of the noise. Behind the mansion's gate, partially hidden by an ornamental bush, he spotted a dog. The animal was tied to a post with a heavy chain, lying in the dirt without water or shelter from the hot Memphis sun. Its ribs showed through its dirty coat. "Hey there," Andre called softly, moving closer to the gate. The dog's ears perked up, and it lifted its head weakly. The chain clinked against the post. Andre's throat tightened. He glanced around. No one was watching. The street was empty in the afternoon heat. He could see the dog's water bowl had tipped over, bone dry in the dirt. "That ain't right," he muttered, fingers curling around the gate's metal bars. His mother's warnings about staying out of trouble echoed in his mind. They couldn't afford any problems, not with bills piling up and her working 2 jobs just to keep them afloat. But the dog whined again, a desperate sound that made Andre's chest hurt. He looked up at the mansion's dark windows. No cars in the circular driveway. Nobody around except Mrs. Peterson watering her roses 2 houses down, but she was practically blind anyway. Andre's heart pounded as he tested the gate. It was locked, of course, but the hedge ran right up alongside it, and there was a spot where the branches made a natural ladder. "Just gonna give him some water," Andre whispered to himself. "That's all. Just water." He took one more look around, then grabbed the hedge branches and started to climb. Mrs. Peterson never looked up from her roses. The sound of his sneakers hitting the ground on the other side of the gate seemed impossibly loud. Andre froze, expecting shouts or alarms, but there was only the buzz of cicadas and the dog's quiet whimper. He crept closer, speaking in low, soothing tones. "It's okay, boy. I'm not going to hurt you. Just want to help. That's all." The dog watched him with wary eyes, but didn't growl. Its tail gave a tentative wag as Andre approached. "Look at that chain," Andre said, kneeling beside the dog. "That ain't no way to treat nobody." The metal links were thick and heavy, wrapped multiple times around the dog's neck. Andre's fingers worked at the crude knots, his hands shaking slightly. He could feel the dog's ribs under his palm as he steadied it. A door slammed somewhere down the street. Andre's head snapped up, pulse racing. Through the hedge, he could see a small group of neighbors gathering, pointing toward the Thompson property. Their voices carried clearly in the afternoon air. "Isn't that the Jenkins boy? Someone should call the police. I always knew that child was trouble." Andre's fingers moved faster, desperately working at the chain. The dog seemed to sense his urgency, staying perfectly still. "Almost got it," he whispered. "Almost there. Finally, the last knot came loose. The chain slipped free with a soft rattle. The dog stood shakily, shaking itself. Its tail wagged harder now, and it pressed its nose against Andre's hand in silent thanks. "Go on," Andre urged, hearing more voices joining the group outside. "Get out of here before they catch us both." The dog hesitated for a moment, then turned and trotted toward the back of the property, disappearing around the corner of the mansion. Andre watched it go, his heart still racing but a small smile tugging at his lips. Then he heard the unmistakable sound of someone dialing a phone, and the smile vanished. "Yes, police? There's a boy breaking into the Thompson property." Andre scrambled back to the hedge, fingers finding the same branches he'd used to climb in. He pulled himself up and over in seconds, landing hard on the sidewalk. Without looking back, he ran. His backpack bounced against his spine as he sprinted down the street, past perfectly maintained lawns and judgmental stairs. His lungs burned, but he didn't slow down until he reached his own street, where the houses were smaller and closer together, paint peeling and yards overgrown. Only then did he stop, bending over with his hands on his knees, gulping air. His uniform was dirty and torn from the hedge. Mom would be mad about that. But when he closed his eyes, he could still feel the dog's grateful nudge against his palm, still see its tail wagging as it trotted away to freedom. Worth it, he thought. No matter what happened next, it was worth it. He straightened up, adjusted his backpack, and walked the rest of the way home. The afternoon sun beat down on his shoulders, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Andre smiled, hoping it was a happy bark, a free bark. The empty house waited for him, silent and still. His mom wouldn't be home for hours yet. Andre climbed the creaky steps to their front porch, fishing his key from his pocket. Behind him, he could hear the whispers starting already, neighbors peering through their windows at the boy who dared to break into the Thompson place. Let them talk, he thought, pushing open the door. The dog was free. That's what mattered. But as he stepped into the quiet house, Andre couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Something had changed today, set in motion by a rusty chain and a boy who couldn't walk away. He just hoped he was strong enough to face whatever came next. Andre sat on his bed, staring at the torn sleeve of his uniform. The evening sun cast long shadows through his window, and somewhere outside, voices murmured. He could hear them through the thin walls, neighbors talking, phones ringing, the buzz of gossip spreading through the street like wildfire. The front door creaked, open downstairs. "Andre!" His mother's voice carried up the stairs, tired but warm. "You home? Yeah, Mom?" His fingers worried at the torn fabric. No way to hide this one. Her footsteps on the stairs, slow and heavy after a double shift. She appeared in his doorway, still wearing her waitress uniform, dark circles under her eyes. The smile fell from her face when she saw his clothes. "What happened to your uniform?" She crossed the room in 3 quick steps. "Andre, that's your last good one?" "I know. I'm sorry." He couldn't meet her eyes. There was this dog. A knock at the front door cut him off. Sharp, authoritative. Andre's stomach dropped. His mother's expression hardened. "Stay here," she said, turning toward the stairs. But Andre followed anyway, hanging back in the shadows of the stairwell as she opened the door. 2 police officers stood on their porch, casting long shadows in the evening light. "Mrs. Jenkins? We need to talk about your son's activities this afternoon." Andre watched his mother's shoulders stiffen. "What activities?" "Several witnesses saw him breaking into the Thompson property. There are concerns about potential theft." "I didn't steal nothing," Andre burst out, stepping into view. "There was a dog. It was chained up with no water. Andre, quiet." His mother's voice was sharp. She turned back to the officers. "My son's not a thief. If there's been a misunderstanding, the Thompsons may press charges," one officer said. "Breaking and entering is a serious offense, ma'am, regardless of the reason." Andre's mother gripped the doorframe so hard her knuckles went white. "He's 11 years old enough to know better than to enter private property." The officer pulled out a notepad. "We'll need to take a statement." The questioning lasted an hour. Andre sat on the couch, his mother beside him, and told the truth about the dog, the chain, the empty water bowl. The officers wrote everything down, faces impassive. Finally, they left with a warning and a card with a case number. The screen door banged shut behind them, leaving mother and son in heavy silence. Mom, not now. She pressed her fingers to her temples. Just go to your room. We'll talk about this in the morning. Andre climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. Through his bedroom window, he could see the neighbors still gathered in small clusters, talking and pointing at their house. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every car that passed made him tense, expecting more police. Every voice outside seemed to be talking about him. But whenever he closed his eyes, he saw the dog's grateful look, felt that gentle nudge against his palm. Morning brought no relief. Andre woke to the sound of his mother on the phone, her voice tight with stress. Yes, I understand it's my responsibility to replace the damaged shrubs. No, of course he won't be there again. Yes, I'll make sure. He dressed quietly in his backup uniform, the one with the stain on the collar that never quite came out. When he went downstairs, his mother was sitting at the kitchen table, head in her hands. Sit down, she said without looking up. Andre slid into the chair across from her. The morning sun streamed through their small kitchen window, highlighting the worry lines on her face. They want $300 for the damaged hedges, she said finally. That's half our rent money. I'm sorry. The words felt small and useless. Sorry doesn't pay bills, Andre. She looked up at him, eyes tired but fierce. What were you thinking? Breaking into someone's property? With everything we're already dealing with. The dog was suffering, Mom. No water, no shade, just a heavy chain. And what about us? What happens to us if they press charges? If I lose my jobs because I have to keep leaving to deal with police and lawyers? Her voice cracked. We're hardly keeping our heads above water as it is. Andre stared at his hands, shame and defiance warring in his chest. It wasn't right what they were doing to that dog. Life isn't right, baby. His mother's voice softened. But we can't afford to be heroes. Not people like us. A scratching sound at the back door interrupted them. Andre jumped up before his mother could stop him, hope flaring in his chest. There on their small back porch sat the dog from yesterday. Its coat was still dirty, but its eyes were brighter. When it saw Andre, its tail thumped against the wooden boards. He followed me home, Andre breathed. Look, Mom, he found us. Andre, no. His mother stood up. We can't, but the dog had already pushed past Andre into their kitchen. It sat down next to him, leaning against his leg like it belonged there. Please, Andre said, his hand finding the dog's head automatically. Just look at him. He chose us. His mother stared at them both for a long moment. The dog stared back, its tail still wagging hopefully. We can barely feed ourselves, she said, but her voice wavered. The dog whined softly, pressing closer to Andre. I'll skip lunch at school, Andre said quickly. And I can do extra chores for Mrs. Wilson next door. She always needs help with her garden. A sharp knock at the front door made them all freeze. Through the window, Andre could see Mr. Thompson's expensive car parked in front of their house. His mother's face went pale. Andre, take the dog to your room. Now. But now, Andre's. He hurried upstairs, the dog following close at his heels. From his room, he could hear the front door open, hear the murmur of adult voices downstairs. He sat on his bed, the dog's head in his lap, and waited. Minutes stretched like hours. The dog's warmth against his leg was comforting, but his heart wouldn't stop racing. Every firm word that carried up the stairs made him flinch. Finally, his mother called him down. Andre looked at the dog. Stay, he whispered. Please stay. He descended the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a mile. Mr. Thompson stood in their living room, tall and imposing in his expensive suit. Andre's mother sat on the couch, her face unreadable. So, Mr. Thompson said, looking down at Andre, you're the boy who broke into my property. Andre straightened his spine. Yes, sir. To help the dog that's currently upstairs in your bedroom. Andre's breath caught. How did he know? Mr. Thompson's expression didn't change. I can hear its tail thumping against the floor. As if on cue, the dog appeared at the top of the stairs, having disobeyed Andre's stay command. It looked down at them all, tail still wagging uncertainly. This was what Andre thought. They were really in trouble now. But then something unexpected happened. Mr. Thompson's stern expression cracked, just slightly, as he looked at the dog. "Well," he said, turning back to Andre, "perhaps we should talk about this properly." The morning after Mr. Thompson's visit, Andre walked to school alone. The dog, which he'd started calling Shadow, had tried to follow, but his mother made him leave it in the backyard. "We're in enough trouble as it is," she'd said, her voice leaving no room for argument. The whispers started before he even reached the school gates. "That's him, the thief. My mom says his whole family's trouble. Did you hear they found stolen stuff in his house?" Andre kept his head down, gripping his backpack straps tight. The lies stung, but he forced himself to keep walking. Shadow's grateful eyes flashed in his memory, giving him strength. "Hey, Jenkins." He recognized that voice. Tommy Parker, whose father owned the hardware store. Andre tried to walk faster, but a hand grabbed his shoulder, spinning him around. "My dad says your kind don't belong in this neighborhood," Tommy sneered. Two other boys flanked him, identical smirks on their faces. Andre's hands curled into fists. "Your dad doesn't know nothing about my kind. We know you're thieves." Tommy stepped closer. "Bet you were casing the Thompson place, weren't you? Using that dog story as a cover." "It wasn't a story." Andre's voice cracked. "That dog was suffering. The only one suffering is going to be you if you don't. Is there a problem here?" Mrs. Harrison, Andre's homeroom teacher, appeared behind them. Her sharp eyes took in the scene, three boys surrounding one, classic trouble in the making. Tommy stepped back smoothly. "No problem, Mrs. Harrison. Just talking. Then I suggest you all get to class. Now." The boys scattered, but not before Tommy whispered, "This isn't over, Jenkins." First period was math. Andre sat in his usual spot near the window, but today it felt like everyone was staring at him. Sally Chun, who usually shared her pencils with him, moved her desk an inch away when he sat down. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his mother. "Boss wants to see me. Might be late tonight. Do not leave the yard after school." Andre's stomach clenched. His mother had already lost one job last month. They couldn't afford for her to lose another. The morning crawled by. In English, they were supposed to pair up for a project. Andre watched as everyone else quickly found partners, leaving him alone. Mrs. Harrison had to assign someone to work with him. Martin Weber, who looked like he'd rather eat dirt. By lunch, the isolation was complete. His usual spot at the far table was empty, but somehow that felt worse than the whispers. Even the pigeons seemed to have found somewhere else to be. He unwrapped his sandwich, smaller today, since they were sharing their food budget with Shadow now, when his phone buzzed again. "Lost my job at the diner. We need to talk when I get home." The sandwich turned to ash in his mouth. He wrapped it back up with shaking hands, appetite gone. The afternoon passed in a blur of worried thoughts and avoided gazes. After the final bell, Andre walked home slowly, dreading what waited there. The neighbors who usually waved now hurried inside when they saw him coming. Shadow greeted him at the back gate, tail wagging. At least someone was still happy to see him. "Hey, boy." Andre scratched behind the dog's ears. "Guess it's just you and me for a while." He did his homework on the back steps, Shadow's head in his lap. The dog's warmth was comforting, but it couldn't completely ease the knot in his stomach. Around sunset, he heard voices from the front of the house. Peering around the corner, he saw a group of neighbors talking to his mother, who had just gotten home. Their voices carried clearly in the evening air. Concerned about property values. Can't have criminals in the neighborhood. Maybe it's time to consider moving somewhere more appropriate. His mother stood straight-backed, letting them talk. But Andre could see her hands shaking as she gripped her purse. "I understand your concerns," she said finally, her voice tight. "Now if you'll excuse me, I need to see my son." She closed the door firmly in their faces. Andre quickly went back to the steps, pretending he hadn't been listening. But when his mother came around to the backyard, one look at her face told him everything. "Pack your homework up," she said. "We need to talk inside." Shadow whined as they went in without him. Andre watched through the window as the dog settled on the back steps, head on his paws. His mother sat heavily at the kitchen table. In the harsh fluorescent light, she looked older than her 35 years. "I lost the diner job," she said without preamble. "They said they've had complaints about having me there. About us." Andre's throat felt tight. Because of what I did. Because people in this neighborhood have been looking for an excuse. She rubbed her temples. The rent's going up next month. Without the diner job, we'll have to move. The words felt like stones in his mouth. There's a place across town. It's smaller, and the neighborhood's rougher. But a rock crashed through their kitchen window. Glass shattered everywhere. Shadow started barking outside. Andre's mother shoved him down, covering him with her body as more rocks followed. Get out of our neighborhood. Take your thieving brat with you. The voices were young, probably Tommy and his friends. But no adults came out to stop them. When the rocks stopped falling, Andre and his mother stayed on the floor for a long moment, glass glittering around them in the kitchen lights. Shadow's barking had turned to worried whines. Are you hurt? His mother's hands moved over him, checking for cuts. I'm okay. But his voice shook. Mom, I'm sorry. This is all my fault. She pulled him close, glass crunching under their feet. No, baby. This isn't your fault. This is about them, not you. But if I hadn't helped Shadow, then you wouldn't be the boy I raised. She kissed the top of his head. The boy your father should have stuck around to see. They spent the next hour sweeping up glass, putting cardboard over the broken window. Shadow watched through the gap, whimpering occasionally until Andre let him in. Just for tonight, his mother said, but her heart wasn't in it. Later, lying in bed with Shadow curled against his side, Andre heard his mother crying softly in her room. The sound made his chest hurt worse than any rock could have. Tomorrow he decided he would fix this. He had to. Somehow. His hand found Shadow's head in the dark. The dog licked his fingers, a gentle reminder that at least one good thing had come from all this. But as police sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, Andre wondered if doing the right thing was supposed to feel this heavy, this hard. He thought about the Thompson mansion, about chains and choices, about the price of standing up for what you believe in. So it was a long time coming. Andre stared at the cardboard covering their kitchen window while he picked at his breakfast. The morning sun created a dim brown glow through the makeshift repair, making the kitchen feel darker than usual. Shadow lay at his feet, occasionally nudging his leg for scraps. Stop feeding the dog your breakfast, his mother said without looking up from the newspaper's job listings. Red circles dotted the page, but most had already been crossed out. Not hungry anyway. Andre pushed his half-eaten toast away. His mother lowered the paper. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She hadn't slept much either. You need to eat. School's hard enough without an empty stomach. Can't I just stay home today? No. She folded the paper decisively. We don't hide, Andre. That's not who we are. A car door slammed outside. Andre went to the window, peering through a gap in the cardboard. Tommy Parker's father was getting into his BMW, briefcase in hand. He looked directly at their house, shaking his head before driving away. The moving truck comes Saturday, his mother said quietly. Just 3 more days. You can handle 3 days? Andre nodded, but his throat felt tight. 3 days. 3 more days of whispers and stares. 3 more days until they left the only home he'd ever known. Shadow whined, pressing against his leg. He can't come to the new place, his mother said, seeing Andre's hand drop to the dog's head. The landlord already said no pets. But no buts. Mr. Thompson agreed to take him back. Now that he knows, now that things are different, Andre's eyes burned. Nothing's different. We'll just chain him up again. He promised he wouldn't. She stood, gathering her purse. Sometimes we have to trust people to do the right thing, even if they didn't before. Like you trusted Dad? The words came out before he could stop them. His mother's face went still, the way it always did when his father came up. I'm sorry, Andre said quickly. I didn't mean. Get your backpack. You'll be late for school. The walk to school felt longer than usual. Andre took the long way, avoiding the streets where most of his classmates lived. Shadow had tried to follow again, but this time Andre had locked the gate firmly behind him. Better to start getting used to being alone again. The schoolyard was already full when he arrived. Conversation stopped as he passed, replaced by whispers and pointed looks. Andre kept his eyes forward, focusing on the door to his first class. He almost made it. Hey, Jenkins. Tommy Parker and his friends blocked the hallway. Andre's grip tightened on his backpack straps. Heard you're moving. Tommy said, smirking. Finally figured out where trash belongs, huh? Get out of my way. Or what? You'll steal my stuff too? I never stole anything. Andre's voice came out stronger than he expected. You know that's not true. Tommy stepped closer. I know your kind always lies. Just like your dad, right? Heard he lied about coming back. Andre's backpack hit the floor. His hands curled into fists. Don't talk about my dad. Why not? Everyone knows he ran off. Probably stealing somewhere else now. Andre moved without thinking. His fist connected with Tommy's nose, sending the bigger boy stumbling backward. Blood dripped onto Tommy's expensive white shirt. The hallway erupted in chaos. Teachers appeared from nowhere. Someone grabbed Andre's arms, pulling him back as Tommy's friends surged forward. My nose! He broke my nose! Principal's office. Both of you! Andre let himself be led away, his knuckles stinging. Through the classroom windows, he could see other students pressing their faces to the glass, phones recording everything. The principal's office was cold. Andre sat alone while voices argued in the inner office. He could hear Tommy's father shouting, demanding expulsion. His own mother's voice was quieter, but just as firm. My son is not a violent child. He's been nothing but trouble. If your son hadn't provoked, are you calling my boy a liar? Andre stared at his hands. The right one was starting to swell. In the polished window reflection, he could see his father's eyes looking back at him. The same eyes that had promised to return, promised to explain everything someday. Liar's eyes, Tommy had said. The inner door opened. His mother emerged first, her face tight with anger. Tommy's father followed, his hand on Tommy's shoulder. Tommy's nose was bandaged, his shirt still spotted with blood. 3-day suspension, the principal announced. For both boys. And if there's any further violence, there won't be. Andre's mother cut in. We're moving on Saturday, anyway. Tommy's father sneered. Best news I've heard all week. They left the office separately, Tommy and his father first, then Andre and his mother after a careful count of 100 seconds. Neither of them spoke until they reached the parking lot. I'm sorry, Andre said finally. I know we can't afford. Stop. His mother's voice cracked. Just stop apologizing for standing up for yourself. But the suspension doesn't matter now. She unlocked their old Honda, the door creaking as she opened it. Get in. We got packing to do. The drive home was silent. Andre watched his neighborhood pass by, the neat houses, the clean streets, all the places that had never quite felt like they belonged to people like them. Shadow was waiting at the gate when they pulled up, tail wagging hopefully. Inside, moving boxes were already stacked in the living room. His mother had started packing while he was at school, emptying shelves and cabinets. Their life was being sorted into cardboard containers, labeled with black marker in his mother's neat handwriting. Start with your room, she said, handing him an empty box. Books first, then clothes. Andre climbed the stairs slowly, Shadow padding behind him. His room looked smaller somehow, with the boxes waiting to swallow everything up. He sat on his bed, running his hands over the familiar quilt his grandmother had made. Shadow put his head in Andre's lap, brown eyes full of understanding. What if we just ran away? Andre whispered to the dog. You and me? We could go anywhere. Shadow's tail thumped against the floor. Andre, his mother called from downstairs. Books, baby. Start with the books. He stood up, wiping his eyes quickly. The bookshelf was mostly full of library books. They'd have to be returned before they moved. His own books fit in half a box. 6 paperbacks from school book fairs, 3 hand-me-down Hardy Boys novels, and the picture book his father used to read him every night. Andre held the picture book for a long moment, then placed it in the box marked Donate. Shadow whined softly. It's okay, boy. Andre scratched behind the dog's ears. Can't keep holding on to things that don't want to stay. He worked steadily through the afternoon, filling boxes with his life. Each item brought memories. The action figures his father had given him for his 8th birthday, the soccer trophy from 3rd grade, the family photo that still showed all 3 of them smiling. The photo went in the donate box too. Around sunset, his mother appeared in the doorway. Pizza's here. They ate sitting on the floor, since the kitchen table was already packed. Shadow lay between them, accepting pepperoni when he thought no one was looking. Mr. Thompson called. his mother said after a while. He wants to talk to you before we leave. Andre's pizza turned to cardboard in his mouth. About what? Didn't say. But he wasn't angry. She touched his hand gently. Sometimes doing the right thing has a way of working out, even if it takes time. Andre looked around their half-packed house, at the cardboard-covered window, at the boxes labeled with a new address across town. Doesn't feel like it's working out. His mother was quiet for a moment. You know what I see when I look at you? I see a boy who stands up for what's right, no matter what it costs him. That's worth more than any house or neighborhood. Even if it makes us have to leave, sometimes leaving is just making room for something better to come along. She smiled slightly. Besides, I hear the new neighborhood has a lot of stray cats that could use someone looking out for them. Andre managed a small smile back. Shadow's tail thumped against the floor, spreading pizza crumbs everywhere. Later, lying in bed with Shadow curled in his usual spot, Andre thought about chains. The visible ones, like what had held Shadow, and the invisible ones that kept people trapped in places they didn't belong. Maybe his mother was right. Maybe leaving wasn't running away, but running toward something else. Tomorrow, he decided he would talk to Mr. Thompson. Whatever the man had to say, Andre would face it standing tall. Just like his mother taught him. Just like the boy his father should have stayed to see. The community center buzzed with angry voices. Andre sat in the back row next to his mother, trying to make himself invisible as neighbors filed in. Shadow wasn't allowed inside, so he waited in their car, probably wondering why they'd left him there. This emergency neighborhood meeting will come to order, Mrs. Peterson announced from the podium. Her roses were forgotten tonight. We're here to discuss the recent security concerns in our community. Andre's mother gripped his hand tight. They both knew what security concerns meant. In the past week alone, Mrs. Peterson continued, we've had reports of trespassing, property damage, and suspicious activity. Our children no longer feel safe playing outside. Tommy Parker sat in the front row with his father, his bandaged nose a beacon in the crowd. He turned to smirk at Andre. I've spoken with the police, Mr. Parker said, standing up. They've agreed to increase patrols in our neighborhood. But we need to address the root of the problem. More voices joined in. Property values are dropping. Can't leave our doors unlocked anymore. What's next? Home invasions? Andre's mother stood suddenly. If you have something to say about my family, say it directly. The room went quiet. Every head turned toward them. Mrs. Jenkins, Mrs. Peterson said, her voice sickly sweet. We understand your situation, but surely you can see why parents are concerned. Concerned about what? His mother's voice was steel. About a child who helped an animal in distress? Or is it something else you're all so concerned about? The silence that followed said everything. Your boy broke into private property, Mr. Parker said finally. Damaged expensive landscaping. Started fights at school. After your son provoked him. The point is, Mrs. Peterson cut in, certain elements just don't fit in our community. Andre watched his mother's hand shake as she gripped the chair in front of her. We're leaving on Saturday. Isn't that enough for you people? Mom, Andre whispered, tugging at her sleeve. Let's just go. But she wasn't finished. My son has more character in his little finger than most of you have in your whole bodies. He saw something wrong and he fixed it. That's more than any of you did. By breaking the law. Someone called from the back. By breaking a chain, she shot back. But you all would know about chains, wouldn't you? The room erupted in angry mutters. Andre pulled harder at his mother's sleeve, and this time she let him lead her toward the door. As they left, he heard Mrs. Peterson calling for order, trying to restore calm to her precious meeting. Outside, the night air felt cooler, cleaner. Shadow's tail thumped against the car window when he saw them coming. I'm sorry, his mother said, leaning against the car. I shouldn't have lost my temper. You were right, though. Andre opened the back door, letting Shadow jump out to stretch his legs. They don't care about what's right or wrong. They just care about what people like us might do to their perfect neighborhood. She smiled, but it was tired. Come on, let's go home and finish packing. They drove in silence, Shadow's head resting on the console between them. The streets were empty. Everyone was still at the meeting, probably plotting ways to make sure their kind never moved in again. At home, more boxes waited. They'd packed half the house already, But somehow there was still so much to sort through. Andre headed upstairs with Shadow while his mother tackled the kitchen. He was wrapping his comics and newspaper when he heard voices outside his window. Peering out, he saw a group of kids from school standing in the street, pointing at their house. "I heard they found stolen stuff in there. My dad says they're getting kicked out. Good riddance?" Shadow growled low in his throat. Andre put a hand on his head, quieting him. "Let them talk," he whispered. "They don't matter anymore." But the words still stung, adding to the weight that had settled in his chest since this all began. He turned back to his packing, trying to ignore the voices outside. A rock hit his window. Andre jumped back as another followed, then another. Shadow started barking as kids laughed in the street. "Hey!" His mother's voice rang out from downstairs. "Get away from my house!" More laughter, running feet. By the time Andre got downstairs, the street was empty except for the scattered rocks on their lawn. His mother stood in the doorway, phone in hand. "I'm calling the police." "Don't." Andre touched her arm. "They won't do anything. You know they won't." She knew he was right. The phone lowered slowly. "2 more days," she said quietly. "Just 2 more days." They worked late into the night, packing what was left of their lives into boxes. Shadow helped in his own way, carrying small items to them in his mouth, tail wagging like it was a game. Around midnight, Andre found himself in front of the bookshelf in the living room. Most of the books were packed, but one remained, his father's old Bible, the one he'd left behind like everything else. "You can keep it," his mother said from behind him. "If you want to." Andre touched the worn cover. Inside, his father's name was written in faded ink. "No," he said finally. "No more holding on to things that don't want to stay." The Bible went into the donate box with everything else they were leaving behind. His mother hugged him from behind, her chin resting on his head. "When did you get so wise, baby? Learn from you." They stood there for a moment, watching Shadow nose through empty boxes in the dim light. The house felt different now, less like home and more like a shell they were leaving behind. A car drove by slowly outside. Through the window, Andre saw Mrs. Peterson's face peering in at them. His mother's arms tightened around him. "Let them look," she whispered. "Let them see what strength looks like." Later, lying in his mostly empty room, Andre listened to the night sounds of their neighborhood for one of the last times. Shadow's warm weight pressed against his side, constant and comforting. "We'll find somewhere better," he told the dog. "Somewhere people don't judge you before they know you." Shadow's tail thumped against the mattress. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance, and Andre thought about the new neighborhood they were moving to. His mother had tried to make it sound exciting, but he'd seen her face when she first visited the apartment. He'd heard the locks on the door, seen the bars on the windows. But maybe that was better than fake smiles and real hate hidden behind them. Maybe bars you could see were better than the invisible ones that kept you in your place. Tomorrow, he had to face Mr. Thompson. The thought made his stomach twist, but he forced himself to breathe slowly, like his mother taught him when things got overwhelming. One day at a time, he whispered to Shadow, "That's all we can do, right?" The dog licked his hand in response, a gesture that felt like agreement. Outside, another car drove by slowly. Andre didn't bother looking this time. Let them watch. Let them whisper. In 2 days, they'd be gone, and all the whispers in the world couldn't hurt them anymore. He closed his eyes, trying to imagine their new home. It would be smaller, rougher around the edges. But maybe there, they could just be themselves without anyone telling them they didn't belong. Shadow shifted closer, his steady breathing a lullaby in the quiet room. Together, they drifted off to sleep, leaving the weight of the day behind. For now, at least, that was enough. Andre stood at the Thompson mansion's gate, his heart pounding against his ribs. Shadow sat beside him, tail wagging slowly, as if remembering the last time they'd been here. "You don't have to do this," his mother said from behind the wheel of their idling car. "I can tell him you're not feeling well." Andre shook his head. "No, I need to do this." The intercom crackled to life before he could change his mind. "Yes, it's Andre Jenkins, sir. You asked to see me?" A pause. Then the gate buzzed and slowly opened. Andre looked back at his mother one last time, then started up the long driveway, Shadow trotting beside him. The mansion looked different in daylight, less threatening but somehow bigger. The hedges he'd climbed through had been trimmed and repaired, erasing any sign of his previous visit. The post where Shadow had been chained stood empty. The front door opened before he reached it. Mr. Thompson stood there in a casual sweater and slacks, looking less intimidating than he had in their living room. "Come in, Andre." He held the door wider. The dog, too. Andre followed him into a massive foyer, their footsteps echoing on marble floors. Shadow's claws clicked against the stone as he stayed close to Andre's leg. "This way." Mr. Thompson led them through several rooms, each bigger than Andre's entire house. Finally, they reached what looked like an office, with walls of books and a huge desk by the window. "Sit down." Mr. Thompson gestured to a leather chair that probably cost more than everything Andre owned. Andre perched on the edge of the seat, hands folded in his lap. Shadow lay at his feet, eyes alert. "Do you know why I asked you here? To tell me to stay away from your property?" Andre's voice came out smaller than he meant it to. Mr. Thompson's mouth twitched. "Actually, I wanted to show you something." He pressed a button on his desk. A screen descended from the ceiling, flickering to life with security camera footage. Andre's stomach dropped as he recognized himself climbing through the hedge. "Please don't call the police again," he said quickly. "We're leaving tomorrow anyway. Watch." The footage continued, showing Andre approaching the chained dog. There was no sound, but Andre remembered every moment. The gentle words, the careful movements, the way Shadow had pressed against his hand in gratitude. "Now watch this." Mr. Thompson fast-forwarded to later that night. The camera showed him arriving home, discovering the empty chain. But instead of calling the police immediately, he watched something on his phone, footage from earlier, Andre realized. The same scene they just watched. The video ended. Mr. Thompson turned to Andre. "Do you know what I saw in that footage?" Andre shook his head. "I saw myself 40 years ago." Mr. Thompson's voice softened. "When I was just a poor kid from South Memphis, breaking into a junkyard to free a dog they used as a guard animal." Andre's head snapped up. "You got caught too. But the owner saw what you saw, an animal suffering, and someone brave enough to do something about it." He leaned back in his chair. "That man gave me my first job, helped me get through college. Everything I have now started because I couldn't walk past an animal in pain." Shadow's tail thumped against the floor. "But," Andre struggled to understand, "then why did you have Shadow chained up like that?" "I didn't." Mr. Thompson's face darkened. "My nephew was staying here while I was traveling. He has old-fashioned ideas about guard dogs. When I saw that footage, I fired him immediately." Hope flickered in Andre's chest. "So you're not mad?" "Mad? No." Mr. Thompson stood, walking to the window. "Impressed, yes. Ashamed that it took a child to show me what was happening in my own home. Definitely." He turned back to Andre. "But I'm also concerned. Your mother tells me you're moving to Parkway Village." Andre nodded. Everyone knew that neighborhood, where people went when they couldn't afford to live anywhere else. "That's not a good place for a boy like you. We don't have a choice." Andre's voice cracked. "Mom lost her jobs because of what I did, because of what others did in response to your act of kindness," Mr. Thompson corrected. "There's a difference." He returned to his desk, pulling out a folder. "I've been looking for someone to manage my new animal shelter project. Someone who understands both business and compassion." He slid a paper across the desk. "Your mother's resume is impressive. 2 jobs, raising a son alone, perfect attendance record until recently." Andre stared at the paper. It was a job offer, with a salary that made his eyes widen. "The position comes with an apartment above the shelter," Mr. Thompson continued. "Small, but clean. Good school district." And he smiled slightly, very pet-friendly. Shadow's ears perked up. "Why?" Andre whispered. "Why would you help us?" "Because 40 years ago, someone helped me. And because the world needs more people willing to do what's right, even when it's hard." Mr. Thompson's eyes were serious. "Sometimes those people just need a little help staying in places where they can make a difference." Andre looked down at Shadow, then back at the paper. "The neighbors won't like it. The neighbors don't own this neighborhood." Mr. Thompson's voice hardened. "And it's time they learned that character matters more than credit scores." He stood, extending his hand to Andre. "So, what do you say? Partners?" Andre stood too, his hand disappearing into Mr. Thompson's larger one. Partners, Shadow barked once, as if sealing the deal. Good. Mr. Thompson smiled fully for the first time. Now let's call your mother in. We have some paperwork to handle. As Mr. Thompson walked to the door, Andre stayed rooted in place, overwhelmed by how quickly everything had changed. Mr. Thompson? The man turned back. Yes. The man who helped you with the junkyard dog. What happened to him? He passed away 20 years ago. Mr. Thompson's eyes softened. But every shelter I build, every animal we save carries his name. Just like every kind act you perform will ripple out in ways you might never see. He opened the door, gesturing for Andre to follow. Come on, time to show your mother her new office. Andre walked out with his head high, Shadow trotting happily beside him. The mansion didn't seem so intimidating anymore. Neither did the future. Sometimes he realized the biggest chains were the ones in your mind, the ones that told you where you belonged, what you deserved, who you could become. And sometimes, all it took to break those chains was one person willing to see past them, one person willing to help, one person who remembered what it felt like to be the boy who cared too much. Andre sat in Mr. Thompson's office, watching his mother read through the contract for the third time. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned each page. Shadow dozed at Andre's feet, completely at home on the expensive carpet. This is... His mother's voice faltered. This is very generous, Mr. Thompson. Please call me James. Mr. Thompson leaned forward in his chair. And it's not generosity. It's investment in talent. But the apartment, the salary, the benefits... She shook her head. Why? Because I've spent 40 years building shelters across this country, Mr. Thompson said. And in all that time, I've rarely met anyone who understands both the business side and the heart side. You manage 2 jobs while raising a son who risks everything to help others. That's exactly what I need. Andre watched his mother's face, seeing the moment when disbelief gave way to hope. When would you need me to start? How about today? Mr. Thompson stood. I'll show you the shelter. It's just 2 blocks from here. They piled into Mr. Thompson's car, a sleek black SUV that made their old Honda look like a toy. Shadow jumped into the back seat like he belonged there, tail wagging. The shelter's still under construction, Mr. Thompson explained as they drove. But the apartment above it is ready. Previous manager lived there before retiring. They turned down a quiet street Andre had never explored before. A large building stood at the end, its fresh paint gleaming in the morning sun. A sign out front read, Thompson Memorial Animal Shelter. Opening soon. Memorial? Andre's mother asked. For Jack Cooper. Mr. Thompson's voice softened. The man who gave me my chance 40 years ago. He parked in front of the building. Up close, Andre could see it was bigger than he'd thought. 2 stories high, with large windows and a fenced yard behind it. Living quarters are upstairs, Mr. Thompson said, unlocking the front door. Shelter facilities down here. Come on, I'll show you around. The inside smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. Mr. Thompson led them through kennels equipped with everything a dog could need, past a modern veterinary clinic, through a play area with climbing structures and toys. This will be your office, he said, opening a door near the front. Security monitors, computer system, everything you need to run both the business and care sides. Andre's mother ran her hand over the desk. Solid wood, nothing like the plastic one she'd worked at before. And upstairs, Mr. Thompson led them up a private staircase at the back of the building. The apartment took up the entire second floor. Clean windows let in plenty of light, showing a living room bigger than their current one, a kitchen with new appliances, 2 bedrooms with fresh carpet. It's furnished, Mr. Thompson said. Previous manager left everything when she moved to Florida. You can change whatever you want, of course. Shadow trotted from room to room, sniffing everything, tail wagging faster with each discovery. The dog approves, Mr. Thompson smiled. What about you, Andre? Andre stood in what would be his new bedroom, staring out the window. From here, he could see the whole neighborhood, including his school in the distance. I can stay at my school? It's in the district. Mr. Thompson nodded. Though after yesterday's incident, we might want to discuss other options. No, Andre said firmly. I want to stay. Show them they didn't run us out. His mother touched his shoulder. Are you sure, baby? After everything that's happened? Andre thought about Tommy Parker's sneers, about the rocks through their window, about the neighbors who'd wanted them gone. Yes, he said. I'm sure. Mr. Thompson's phone buzzed. He checked it and smiled. Perfect timing. The construction foreman needs me to sign some papers. Why don't you two look around, get a feel for the place? Take your time. After he left, Andre and his mother stood in the living room, looking at each other in stunned silence. Is this real? Andre whispered. His mother sank onto the couch, nicer than any they'd ever owned. I think it is, baby. Shadow jumped up beside her, resting his head in her lap. She laughed softly, scratching behind his ears. Guess you knew what you were doing all along. Huh? She said to the dog, leading us right where we needed to be. Andre sat on her other side. Are you going to take the job? Should I? Yes. The word burst out of him. Mom, it's perfect. You love animals as much as I do, and Mr. Thompson's nice. And we can keep Shadow and stay in the neighborhood that's been so welcoming. Her voice turned bitter. So we show them they're wrong about us. Andre gripped her hand. Like you always said, we don't hide. She was quiet for a long moment, looking around the apartment. At the solid walls, the clean windows, the space that could be theirs. We'd have to move everything again, she said finally. We're already packed. True. A smile tugged at her lips. And it is closer to your school, and no bars on the windows like the other place. And Shadow would have a whole shelter to play in. They looked at each other, grins spreading slowly across their faces. We're really doing this? Andre asked. His mother pulled him close, kissing the top of his head. Yeah, baby. I think we are. They spent the next hour exploring every corner of their new home. Andre's room was twice the size of his old one, with built-in bookshelves and a desk by the window. The kitchen had a dishwasher, something they'd never had before. Even the bathroom was big, with a tub his mother could actually stretch out in. Mr. Thompson returned just as they finished their third walkthrough. Well, he stood in the doorway, keys in hand. What's the verdict? Andre's mother straightened her spine. When can I start? Mr. Thompson's face broke into a wide smile. He tossed her the keys. How about you start by moving in? I'll have some guys help bring your things over. We can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. He pulled out his phone. Let me make a few calls. An hour later, 3 moving trucks pulled up outside their old house. Professional movers worked quickly, carrying boxes and furniture while the neighbors watched from behind their curtains. Andre stood on the front lawn with Shadow, supervising as the movers handled his things. He caught sight of Tommy Parker walking by with his friends, all of them stopping to stare. You're not really staying in the neighborhood, are you? Tommy called out. After everything, Andre squared his shoulders. Yeah, we are. Got a problem with that. Tommy opened his mouth, probably to say something nasty, but then a sleek black SUV pulled up. Mr. Thompson stepped out, surveying the scene. Everything okay here, Andre? Tommy's face went pale. His friends backed away slowly. No problem, Mr. Thompson, Andre said clearly. Just saying goodbye to old neighbors. Tommy and his friends hurried away without another word. By sunset, everything was moved into the apartment above the shelter. Andre stood in his new room, unpacking books onto the built-in shelves. Shadow lay on his new bed, watching contentedly. His mother appeared in the doorway. Mr. Thompson wants us to come down to his house for dinner. Says we should celebrate. Can Shadow come? He insisted on it. They walked the 2 blocks to the mansion, the summer evening warm and peaceful around them. Andre noticed fewer curtains twitching as they passed, fewer whispers following them. Maybe things really could change. At the mansion, Mr. Thompson's housekeeper had prepared a feast. They ate in a formal dining room bigger than their old apartment, but somehow it didn't feel intimidating anymore. To new beginnings, Mr. Thompson raised his glass of water, matching their soft drinks. And to doing the right thing, no matter what, Andre clinked his glass carefully, watching Shadow doze under the table at his feet. The dog looked completely at home, like he'd known all along this was where they'd end up. Maybe he had. Later that night, lying in his new bed with Shadow in his usual spot beside him, Andre thought about chains again. about how sometimes breaking them led to places you never expected, about how doing the right thing might cost you everything, but could also give you everything you never knew you needed. Tomorrow, he'd face the school again, face the whispers and stares. But tonight, in this room that was already starting to feel like home, none of that seemed to matter. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Andre's mother stood in front of their bathroom mirror, adjusting her new blazer. The morning sun streamed through clean windows, making the apartment feel bright and fresh. "How do I look?" she asked, turning to Andre. "Like a boss." He grinned, spooning cereal into his mouth at their new kitchen counter. "I feel ridiculous." She tugged at the sleeves. "Mr. Thompson didn't have to buy me new clothes." "There were clothes," Andre reminded her. "Part of the job." Shadow lay at his feet, catching stray pieces of cereal that missed Andre's mouth. The dog had adapted to their new home instantly, claiming favorite spots in every room. A knock at the door made them both jump. They weren't used to visitors yet. Andre's mother opened it to find Mr. Thompson standing there. "Ready for your first day?" he asked, smiling at her professional appearance. "As I'll ever be." She grabbed her new briefcase, another work necessity for Mr. Thompson. "Andre, you sure you don't want to ride to school?" Mr. Thompson asked. "It's on my way." "No thanks." Andre stood, shouldering his backpack. "I want to walk." His mother hugged him tight. "Be careful, baby. And remember, head high, heart strong." He finished their morning ritual. "I know, Mom." Andre left first, Shadow trotting beside him until they reached the shelter's front gate. The dog had figured out this was as far as he could go in the mornings. "Be good," Andre told him. "Take care of Mom." Shadow barked once, then turned and trotted back to the shelter entrance, where he'd spend his day helping Andre's mother greet potential adopters. The walk to school felt different now. Andre kept his head up, looking straight ahead instead of at the ground. He noticed things he'd missed before, the way the morning light hit the trees, the sound of birds in the park he passed. A car slowed beside him. Andre tensed, but it was just Mrs. Wilson from their old street. "Andre, is it true what they're saying? About Mr. Thompson giving your mother a job?" "She's managing his new shelter," Andre said proudly. Mrs. Wilson's face softened. Well, that's wonderful, dear. Tell her I said congratulations." She drove off, leaving Andre with a small smile. First victory of the day. The school looked the same, but Andre felt different walking through the gates. Yesterday's suspension was over. Time to face whatever came next. Whispers followed him down the hallway, but they felt less hostile now. "Did you hear about Thompson? The shelter job? Maybe we were wrong." His locker had been cleaned of the nasty words someone had scratched into it during his suspension. Fresh paint covered the spot. "They did it this morning." Andre turned to find Martin Weber, his reluctant English project partner, standing there. "Principal made them," Martin continued. "Tommy and his friends. They had to come early and clean it up." "Really?" Martin shifted uncomfortably. "Listen, about the project, I was thinking maybe we could work on it at lunch, if you want." Andre studied him for a moment. "Yeah, okay. Cool." Martin hurried off, but not before Andre caught a small smile. First period was math. Andre took his usual seat by the window, noticing that Sally Chin didn't move her desk away today. She even shared her pencil when his broke just like before. Small changes. Small victories. By lunch, word had spread through the school about Mr. Thompson's offer, about the shelter, about Andre's mother's new job. The whispers changed tone, became curious instead of condemning. He and Martin sat at a table in the library, working on their English project. Other kids drifted by, some nodding hello, some stopping to chat. "Is it true you're living above the shelter? Are you really staying in the neighborhood? Does Mr. Thompson have other dogs besides the one you saved?" Andre answered their questions patiently, watching Martin's expression shift from uncomfortable to interested. "That's actually pretty cool," Martin said after the others left. "Standing up for the dog like that. My mom won't even let me have a goldfish." "You should come visit the shelter when it opens," Andre found himself saying. "Maybe you could volunteer?" "Yeah." Martin brightened. "That'd be awesome." The afternoon passed quickly. In final period, Andre caught Tommy Parker staring at him, but the other boy quickly looked away. His nose was still slightly swollen. After school, Andre took his time walking home. The afternoon sun felt good on his face, and for the first time in days, he didn't feel like he had to watch his back. He was nearly at the shelter when a familiar bark made him look up. Shadow had somehow gotten out of the front gate and was running toward him, tail wagging wildly. "Shadow, get back here!" Andre's mother jogged after the dog, looking professional despite the chase. She wasn't alone. A small group of people followed her, all smiling. "Potential adopters," she explained when she reached Andre. "Shadow's been helping me give tours all day. He's a natural shelter dog." Shadow sat proudly at Andre's feet as the group caught up. "This must be your son," one woman said. "The boy who saved Shadow." Andre nodded, surprised by the warmth in her voice. "What you did was very brave," another person said. "My daughter's in your class? Katie Wilson?" She told us the whole story. Oh. Andre remembered Katie. She'd always been nice, even if they weren't close. "Thanks." His mother beamed with pride as she finished the tour, showing the group the kennels that would soon house more dogs like Shadow. Andre watched her in her element, confident, professional, exactly where she belonged. Later that evening, Mr. Thompson stopped by with dinner. Pizza, this time. "How was the first day?" he asked them both. "Amazing," Andre's mother said. "We already have 5 adoption applications for when we open and 3 volunteer forms. School was okay," Andre added. "Better than before." Mr. Thompson nodded approvingly. "Change takes time, but it happens." They ate at their new dining table, Shadow sprawled at their feet. Through the windows, Andre could see the sun setting over their neighborhood, still their neighborhood, despite everything. "Oh," his mother said suddenly. "This came in the mail today." She handed Andre an envelope. The return address made his heart stop. His father's handwriting. "You don't have to read it," she said softly. Andre stared at the envelope. Part of him wanted to throw it away like the picture books and old photos. But maybe some chains needed to be faced before they could be broken. "I'll read it later," he decided, tucking the letter into his pocket. Mr. Thompson watched the exchange quietly. "Tomorrow's going to be a big day," he said finally. "The construction crew finishes up, and we can start bringing in our first residents." "Really?" Andre sat up straighter. "Really. In fact, I was hoping you might help me evaluate some of the dogs at the city shelter. See which ones we should transfer over first." "Me? You have good instincts about animals." Mr. Thompson smiled. "And a good heart. That's a rare combination." Andre looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Yeah," he said. "I'd like that." Later, in his room, Andre took out his father's letter. Shadow lay beside him, a steady presence as he stared at the unopened envelope. 3 years of silence, and now this. Through his window, he could see lights on in neighboring houses. Some of those neighbors had wanted them gone just days ago. Now they waved hello, asked about the shelter, showed interest in volunteering. People could change. Life could change. But some changes had to start with you. Andre put the letter in his desk drawer. Not tonight. Tonight was for looking forward, not back. He had shelter dogs to think about, new friends to make, a future that looked brighter than he'd ever imagined. The past could wait. 3 months passed like a dream. The Thompson Memorial Animal Shelter hummed with life. Kennels full of happy dogs waiting for their forever homes. Shadow had appointed himself official greeter, welcoming visitors with enthusiastic tail wags. Andre stood in the shelter's play yard, watching a German Shepherd test its new freedom. The dog had arrived yesterday, rescued from a situation too familiar. Chain too heavy, yard too small, water bowl too empty. "He's doing better today," Martin said, standing beside him. After volunteering at the shelter for 2 months, Martin had developed a good eye for dog behavior. "Yeah." Andre smiled as the German Shepherd discovered the toy box. "Just needed a chance, like all of them." The shelter had already placed 37 dogs in new homes. Each adoption felt like a personal victory, especially when the families came back to visit, showing pictures of their dogs and their new lives. "Andre," his mother's voice called from inside. "Mr. Thompson's here. He wants to talk to us both." They found Mr. Thompson in the office, looking more casual than usual in jeans and a polo shirt. Shadow lay at his feet, completely at home. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chairs. "I have some news." Andre's mother tensed slightly. Old habits died hard, but Mr. Thompson was smiling. The board just approved our expansion plan. We're opening 2 more shelters in Memphis by the end of the year. That's wonderful, Andre's mother exclaimed. It is, and Mr. Thompson turned to her. They want you to oversee all 3 locations. As regional director, she sat down hard. What? You've done amazing work here. Adoption rates are up, costs are down, and the community involvement programs you started are being copied by shelters across the state. Andre grabbed his mother's hand, squeezing tight. There's more, Mr. Thompson continued. Andre, remember that essay you wrote about Shadow? The one for your English class. Andre nodded. The essay had earned him an A, his first in English. I submitted it to the Young Heroes Writing Contest. They announced the winners today. He pulled up a website on the computer screen. Andre's name sat at the top of the page, under the words, First Place. The prize is a $5,000 college scholarship, Mr. Thompson said quietly. And they want to feature your story in their magazine. Andre stared at the screen, not quite believing it. His mother's arms wrapped around him, her tears falling on his shoulder. I'm so proud of you, baby, she whispered. So proud. A commotion at the front desk interrupted their celebration. Martin's voice carried down the hall. Sir, you can't just. I need to see them. You have to sign in first. Andre's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. His father appeared in the office doorway, looking older than Andre remembered. Thinner, tired. Shadow stood up, positioning himself between Andre and the newcomer. Hello, Marcus. Andre's mother's voice was ice. Marie. His father's eyes moved from her to Andre. Son, why are you here? Andre was surprised by how steady his voice sounded. I got your letter. His father shifted uncomfortably. The one you sent back unopened. You didn't answer me for 3 years. Andre stood up. Why should I answer you? I know I messed up, but when I read about you in the paper, what you did for that dog, standing up to everyone, he swallowed hard. It made me realize what a coward I've been. Mr. Thompson stood quietly. Should I give you some privacy? No, Andre said quickly. You should stay. His father looked between them, understanding dawning on his face. You're the man who gave them the job? The shelter. I gave them an opportunity, Mr. Thompson corrected. They did the rest themselves. Marie stepped closer to Andre. Why are you really here, Marcus? His father's shoulders slumped. I wanted to make things right. I've been sober for 8 months now. Got a steady job, an apartment. I thought maybe what? Andre's voice cracked. Maybe you could just walk back in after 3 years? Like you didn't leave us with nothing? Shadow pressed against his leg, grounding him. No. His father's voice was soft. Not like that. I wanted you to know I'm trying. To be better. Like you? I'm nothing like you. Andre's words came out sharp. I don't run away when things get hard. No. His father smiled sadly. No. You run toward trouble when someone needs help. You're stronger than I ever was. Silence filled the office. Outside, dogs barked and played. Life went on. I can't. Andre took a deep breath. I can't forgive you. Not yet. I understand. But maybe. Andre looked at his mother, who nodded slightly. Maybe we could get coffee sometime. Talk. His father's eyes lit up. I'd like that. Not today, Andre added quickly. I have work to do here. Of course. His father backed toward the door. Thank you, son, for being willing to try. After he left, Andre sat heavily in his chair. Shadow immediately put his head in Andre's lap. You okay, baby? His mother asked softly. Yeah. Andre scratched behind Shadow's ears. Just thinking about chains. Oh. Some you break all at once like Shadow's. Some take longer. Mr. Thompson nodded approvingly. Wisdom beyond your years, Andre. A bark from the front desk interrupted them. Martin calling for help with a new arrival. Andre stood up, ready to get back to work. Coming, he called. The new dog was another rescue, brought in by animal control. Young pit bull. Too skinny, fear in its eyes. But its tail wagged, hopefully, when Andre knelt beside it. Hey there, he said softly. You're safe now. No more chains for you. Shadow demonstrated by bringing over a toy, showing the newcomer how to play. Andre's mother and Mr. Thompson watched from the office doorway as Andre worked with the new dog, patient and gentle. "He's going to run this place someday," Mr. Thompson said quietly. "Better," Andre's mother replied. "He's going to change it. Change everything." By sunset, the new dog was settled in a clean kennel, already learning to trust. Andre did his final rounds, checking water bowls and blankets, speaking softly to each animal. Shadow followed him faithfully, just as he had that first day when Andre climbed through the hedge to save him. In the apartment above, Andre could hear his mother on the phone, already planning the new shelters. Through the windows, he saw lights coming on in neighboring houses. Houses where people now smiled and waved, where children asked to volunteer, where change had taken root and grown. The unopened letter from his father still sat in his desk drawer. Maybe tomorrow he'd read it. Maybe not. The choice was his now. Andre saved Shadow's kennel for last. The one they kept as a reminder, its chain hung on the wall above it. Not as a trophy, but as a promise. Every chain breaks, given time. Every heart heals, given love. Every story changes, given hope. Shadow pressed against his leg one last time before they headed upstairs. Together, as always. Free at last.